A lone gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Fort Collins, Colorado, silencing the crowd that had gathered in the town square on that scorching August day in 1878. Catherine Lawson's heart pounded against her ribs as she stood on the wooden platform, her wrists bound tightly behind her back, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangled waves around her tear-streaked face. The sun beat down mercilessly on the townsfolk who had abandoned their daily routines to witness justice being served, or what Mayor Thompson called justice. Catherine's crime: stealing medicine for her dying father from the town's only pharmacy. A crime punishable by 20 lashes in public, as the mayor had declared with a cold smile that never reached his eyes. This woman has taken what does not belong to her, Mayor Thompson's voice boomed across the square. And in Fort Collins, we do not tolerate thieves. Catherine closed her eyes, preparing herself for the first strike of the whip. Sheriff Wilson stood behind her, unwrapping the leather whip slowly, almost savoring the moment. The crowd murmured, some with pity in their eyes, others with the morbid excitement of those who had little entertainment in their lives. "That's enough." The voice cut through the tension like a knife. The crowd parted as a tall figure strode forward. His spurs jangled with each determined step, the brim of his hat pulled low over his eyes. When he reached the front of the crowd, he lifted his face, revealing features hardened by sun and hardship, but eyes that burned with a fierce intensity. "Hayden Livingston," Mayor Thompson sneered. "This is not your business." "I'm making it my business," Hayden replied, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "You're not whipping a woman for trying to save her father's life." Catherine looked at her defender with wide eyes. She knew of Hayden Livingston. Everyone in Fort Collins did. The former Texas Ranger turned cattle rancher had a reputation for being fair but formidable. He'd arrived 3 years ago, purchased land outside town, and kept mostly to himself except for necessary business. "The law is the law, Livingston," Sheriff Wilson said, stepping forward, the whip still in his hand. "Is it?" Hayden's voice was dangerously soft. "Last I checked, the law also says a person has the right to a fair trial. I don't recall Miss Lawson getting one." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Catherine watched as uncertainty spread across their faces. They all knew her father, Edward Lawson, a respected carpenter who'd built half the structures in town before illness had confined him to his bed. "She was caught red-handed," Mayor Thompson insisted. "And I'll pay for whatever she took," Hayden countered, pulling out a leather pouch that jangled with coins. "Double its worth, triple even, but you're not laying a whip on her back today." A tense silence fell over the square. Catherine held her breath, her fate hanging in the balance as the two men stared each other down. Mayor Thompson's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Hayden stood immovable as a mountain. "You've got no authority here, Cowboy," the mayor finally spat. "Maybe not," Hayden agreed, his hand still hovering near his gun. "But I've got the backing of every decent person in this town who knows that Edward Lawson deserves better than watching his daughter be whipped for trying to save his life." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several townspeople stepped forward to stand beside Hayden. "I'll vouch for Miss Lawson," said Mrs. Baker, the widowed owner of the town's boarding house. "Her character is beyond reproach." "As will I," added Mr. Peterson, who owned the general store. "Edward Lawson has extended credit to half the people in this town during hard times, including you, Mayor, if I recall correctly." Mayor Thompson's face contorted with rage and embarrassment. He looked around at the crowd, recognizing the shift in public opinion. Sheriff Wilson stepped back, lowering the whip, clearly unwilling to go against the growing sentiment. "Fine," the mayor finally conceded. "But she'll work off her debt. 1 month of service to the town, and you, Livingston, will be responsible for her. Hayden nodded curtly. I'll take that responsibility. Without waiting for further permission, he climbed the steps to the platform and approached Catherine. His hands were gentle as he untied the ropes binding her wrists. "Are you all right, Miss Lawson?" he asked quietly. Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Relief washed over her in dizzying waves. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a grim smile. "You've just been sentenced to a month in my company, and I've been told I'm not the most pleasant man to be around." Despite everything, Catherine felt her lips curve into a small smile. "I imagine I've endured worse." Hayden helped her down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, the spectacle over, disappointed or relieved depending on their nature. Catherine stumbled slightly, her legs weak from standing in fear for so long, and Hayden's strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "I need to get back to my father," she said urgently. "He needs the medicine." Hayden nodded. "I have my wagon. We'll stop by the pharmacy first, then I'll take you home." As they walked toward his wagon, Catherine could feel the eyes of the townspeople following them. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental, but she held her head high despite her disheveled appearance. "Why did you help me?" she asked as Hayden assisted her onto the wagon seat. He paused before answering, his eyes scanning the dispersing crowd. "Because it wasn't right," he finally said. "And there are too many things in this world that aren't right that I can't do anything about. This one, I could." As they drove toward the pharmacy, Catherine studied him from the corner of her eye. Hayden Livingston was not what she'd expected. The rumors about him painted the picture of a dangerous loner, a man with a past he was running from. But the man beside her had risked his standing in the community to help a woman he barely knew. "The medicine your father needs," Hayden said, breaking the silence. "What is it?" "Laudanum for the pain and a tonic Dr. Bennett prescribed for the infection in his lungs," Catherine replied. I couldn't afford both. We've spent all our savings on treatments already." Hayden's jaw tightened. "Doctor." "Bennett's a good man, but his prices reflect the cost of shipping medicines out here. We'll get both, and anything else your father needs." "I can't accept charity," Catherine said stiffly, her pride flaring despite her desperate situation. "It's not charity," Hayden replied evenly. "It's an advance on your wages. Mayor Thompson said you're to work for me for a month, remember? Well, I need help at my ranch and I pay fair wages." Catherine looked at him skeptically. "What kind of help?" "My housekeeper left 2 weeks ago. Decided ranch life wasn't for her and headed back east. Place is starting to look like a bear's den," he said with a hint of self-deprecation. "You can cook, yes, clean, of course. Then you're already qualified." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the pharmacy. "Wait here." Catherine watched as he disappeared into the pharmacy, his tall frame ducking under the doorway. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The events of the day had left her shaken, but beneath the fear and relief was a growing curiosity about the man who had saved her from public humiliation and pain. When Hayden emerged a few minutes later, he carried a paper package that he placed carefully in Catherine's hands. "Everything, doctor." "Bennett prescribed," he said, "and some extra supplies." "Thank you," Catherine whispered, clutching the package. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this." Hayden climbed back onto the wagon seat. "Let's get you home to your father. That'll be payment enough for now." As they rode through the streets of Fort Collins toward the modest house at the edge of town that Catherine shared with her father, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It was small and fragile, like the first spring flower pushing through snow. But it was there nonetheless. What she didn't realize was that this day, this moment when a taciturn cowboy stepped forward and said that's enough would change both their lives forever. The Lawson home was a small but well-built cabin at the eastern edge of town. Hayden noted the careful craftsmanship that had gone into its construction, the straight lines of the porch, the perfectly fitted window frames. Edward Lawson's skill was evident in every detail. "It's not much," Catherine said apologetically as they approached. "It's a fine home," Hayden replied honestly. "Your father's work," she nodded, a flash of pride cutting through her worry. "He built it when we first came to Colorado. I was 12. Hayden helped her down from the wagon, then gathered the medical supplies. As Catherine opened the door, he hung back, suddenly uncertain. This was her home, her private domain. He was a stranger, despite his intervention in town. "Please come in," she said, noticing his hesitation. "My father will want to thank you." The interior of the cabin was modest but immaculate. A small parlor with simple furniture opened into a kitchen area. A narrow hallway presumably led to bedrooms. What struck Hayden most was how the place felt lived in and cared for. Dried wildflowers in a jar on the table, a patchwork quilt draped over a rocking chair, books stacked neatly on a shelf. "Papa," Catherine called softly, moving toward the hallway. "I'm home, and I've brought the medicine." Hayden stayed by the door, hat in hand, as Catherine disappeared into what must be her father's bedroom. He could hear her speaking in low, soothing tones, explaining what had happened in simplified terms that wouldn't upset a sick man. After several minutes, she reappeared in the hallway. "He'd like to meet you," she said. "If you don't mind." Hayden followed her into a small bedroom where Edward Lawson lay propped up on pillows. Despite his obvious illness, the pallor of his skin, the thinness of his frame, there was a dignity about the older man that commanded respect. "So you're the man who saved my Katie from that fool Thompson," Edward said, his voice weak but his eyes sharp and alert. "Your daughter didn't need much saving, sir," Hayden replied. "She was standing her ground pretty well." Edward's face softened with pride as he looked at his daughter, who was busy measuring out the prescribed dose of medicine. "That sounds like her. Stubborn as her mother was, God rest her soul." "Papa, you need to take this now," Catherine said, helping her father sit up straighter. Hayden watched the gentle way she tended to Edward, the evident love between father and daughter touching something deep inside him that he'd thought long buried. "Mr. Livingston has offered me work at his ranch," Catherine explained as her father took the medicine. "To repay the debt for the stolen medicine. It was Mayor Thompson's ruling." Edward frowned. "I won't have my daughter. It's respectable work, Mr. Lawson," Hayden cut in. "Housekeeping duties only, and she'll be able to come home each evening to care for you." "I need to do this, Papa," Catherine said firmly. "We need the money, and it's better than the alternative." Edward looked between them, clearly unhappy but recognizing the necessity. "You have a reputation as a fair man, Livingston," he finally said. "I'm trusting you with my most precious possession." "I understand, sir," Hayden replied solemnly. "Your daughter will be treated with nothing but respect." After Edward had taken his medicine and Catherine had made him comfortable, they stepped back into the main room of the cabin. "He needs rest now," she explained. "The laudanum helps with the pain." "What exactly is wrong with him?" Hayden asked. Catherine sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Dr. Bennett isn't entirely sure. His lungs never recovered from a winter fever 2 years ago. He gets infections easily, and each one leaves him weaker than before." Her voice broke slightly. "He can't work anymore. We've been getting by on my sewing and what little savings we had, but medicine is expensive," Hayden finished for her. She nodded, blinking back tears. "I didn't know what else to do. Mr. Roberts at the pharmacy refused to extend us any more credit." "You did what any daughter would do," Hayden said. "And now we'll find a better way forward." He moved toward the door. I should let you rest. It's been a difficult day." "When should I start work?" Catherine asked, following him. "Tomorrow, if you can arrange care for your father during the day. My ranch is about 3 miles outside town, north along the river. Do you ride?" "Yes, but we sold our horse last winter." Hayden thought for a moment. "I have a gentle mare you can use. I'll bring her by tomorrow morning, say around 8. "That would be fine," Catherine agreed. "Mrs. Peterson from next door often sits with Papa. I'm sure she'll help." Hayden placed his hat back on his head and stepped onto the porch. "Miss Lawson," he said, turning back to her, "I want you to know that whatever arrangement the mayor forced on us, you're not my prisoner or my servant. You're an employee entitled to fair treatment and wages. Is that clear?" Catherine's eyes widened slightly at his directness. "Yes, Mr. Livingston, and please call me Catherine." "Catherine," he repeated, the name feeling strangely comfortable on his tongue. "Then I'm Hayden." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you again, Hayden, for everything." As he rode back to his ranch, Hayden couldn't shake the image of Catherine standing bravely on that platform, ready to endure punishment to save her father. It stirred something in him, admiration, certainly, but also a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the late summer heat temporarily subdued by a breeze from the mountains. Catherine was up before sunrise, preparing a light breakfast for her father and setting things in order for Mrs. Peterson, who had readily agreed to sit with Edward during the day. "You don't have to do this, Katie," her father protested weakly as she helped him sit up in bed. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way right now, Papa," Catherine replied gently. "And Mr. Livingston seems like a decent man. It's honest work for fair pay." "That's what worries me," Edward muttered. "A single man living alone on a ranch taking in a young woman." "Papa," Catherine felt her cheeks flush. "It's not like that. And even if he had such intentions, which I'm certain he doesn't, I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." Edward sighed, reaching for her hand. "I know you are, but you're all I have, Katie, and you're so much like your mother, beautiful and headstrong, it makes a father worry." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I'll be careful, and I'll be home every evening." A knock at the door signaled Hayden's arrival. Catherine straightened her simple blue dress, checked her appearance one last time in the small mirror hanging by the door, and went to greet him. Hayden stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Behind him, a chestnut mare was tied to the hitching post. "Good morning," Catherine said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Morning," Hayden replied. His eyes took in her appearance briefly before returning to her face. "Are you ready?" "Yes. Let me just say goodbye to my father and make sure Mrs. Peterson has everything she needs." When Catherine returned a few minutes later, Hayden was checking the cinch on the mare's saddle. "This is Penny," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She's steady and reliable. Should be an easy ride for you." Catherine approached the mare, letting her sniff her hand before gently stroking her nose. "She's beautiful." "She's yours to use for as long as you're working at the ranch," Hayden said. "It'll make the commute easier." The gesture touched Catherine more than she expected. "Thank you. That's very generous." "It's practical," Hayden replied with a shrug, but there was a softness in his eyes that belied his matter-of-fact tone. The ride to Hayden's ranch took just under an hour at an easy pace. Catherine was struck by the beauty of the land as they followed the river north out of town. The morning sun gilded the grasslands, and the distant mountains stood purple against the clear blue sky. "How long have you had this land?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. 3 years, Hayden replied. "Bought it from a man who was heading to California. He'd barely started developing it. And before that, I've heard you were a Texas Ranger." Hayden glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. Town gossip travels fast. Fort Collins isn't exactly brimming with mysterious, solitary ranchers who ride in to rescue damsels in distress, Catherine replied with a small smile. To her surprise, Hayden actually chuckled a warm, rusty sound, as if it wasn't used often. I suppose not. He paused before continuing. Yes, I was a ranger, for 8 years after the war. Why did you leave? The question hung in the air for a moment too long, and Catherine worried she'd overstepped. I'm sorry, that's too personal. No, it's a fair question, Hayden said slowly. I left because I was tired of violence, tired of seeing the worst in people. I wanted to build something instead of just enforcing the law. Before Catherine could respond, they crested a small rise, and Hayden's ranch came into view. A substantial log house stood on a gentle slope overlooking a creek that fed into the main river. Behind it were a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small garden plot was visible beside the house. It's lovely, Catherine said sincerely. It's a work in progress, Hayden replied, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached the house, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a large, shaggy beast with a thunderous bark that belied his wagging tail. That's Bear, Hayden said. All noise, no bite. The dogs circled their horses excitedly, then followed as they dismounted near the house. Catherine patted Bear's head, receiving an enthusiastic lick in return. Come on in, Hayden said, leading the way to the house. I'll show you around. The main room of the house was spacious, with large windows that let in plenty of light. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and sturdy, handcrafted furniture gave the place a comfortable, masculine feel. However, Hayden hadn't exaggerated about needing housekeeping help. Books and papers were scattered about, dishes were stacked in the kitchen area, and a fine layer of dust covered most surfaces. I warned you, Hayden said, looking slightly embarrassed. Mrs. Davis left rather suddenly. It's not so bad, Catherine assured him, already mentally organizing her tasks. Nothing a good day's work won't fix. Hayden showed her the rest of the house, the pantry, storeroom, his bedroom, which he opened the door to but didn't enter out of propriety, and a small study filled with more books than Catherine had ever seen outside the town's modest library. You're welcome to borrow any of these, Hayden offered, noticing her interest. Thank you, Catherine said, running her finger along the spines. I love to read, but books are a luxury we haven't been able to afford lately. Once the tour was complete, Hayden explained that he'd be working with his ranch hands most of the day, breaking new horses in the corral behind the barn. The kitchen is stocked, he said. Feel free to prepare whatever you'd like for midday dinner. I usually have 3 hands working, Miguel, Thomas, and Jeb. They eat at the bunkhouse, but they'll expect something around noon. I'll make sure it's ready, Catherine promised. After Hayden left, Catherine rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She began in the kitchen, washing the accumulated dishes and scrubbing the wooden counters until they gleamed. She found the pantry well stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and preserved foods. A root cellar access through a trapdoor in the pantry floor held potatoes, onions, and other vegetables. By mid-morning, the kitchen was spotless, and Catherine had a pot of bean soup simmering on the stove, with cornbread baking in the oven. She moved on to the main room, dusting, sweeping, and organizing the scattered books and papers as best she could without disrupting anything important. Around noon, she heard boots on the porch. Hayden entered, followed by 3 dusty, tired-looking men who eyed her curiously. Miss Lawson, these are my hands, Hayden said. Miguel Vasquez, Thomas Cooper, and Jeb Miller. The men nodded respectfully, removing their hats, "Pleased to meet you all," Catherine said. "Dinner's ready if you're hungry." "That smells mighty fine, miss," Jeb, the oldest of the three, said appreciatively. "We usually eat at the bunkhouse," Miguel added, looking uncertainly at Hayden. "Today's special," Hayden replied. "Miss Lawson's first day deserves a proper welcome." The men sat somewhat awkwardly at the large table while Catherine served the soup and cornbread. The conversation was stilted at first, but soon flowed more naturally as the ranch hands relaxed. Catherine learned that Miguel had been with Hayden since he purchased the ranch, while Thomas and Jeb had joined last year. "Boss man says you're going to be keeping house," Jeb said between mouthfuls of cornbread. "That's the Lord's own blessing." No offense to the boss, but he ain't much for domestic matters. Hayden shot Jeb a look that was more amused than annoyed. "I manage." "If by manage you mean living like a bear in a cave," Thomas quipped, then immediately looked worried he'd overstepped. To Catherine's surprise, Hayden laughed. "Fair enough." As the meal progressed, Catherine observed the easy camaraderie between Hayden and his men. They clearly respected him, but there was none of the fearful deference she'd seen directed at other employers in town. And Hayden himself seemed more relaxed than he had in town or during their ride that morning. After the men returned to work, Catherine cleaned up from the meal and continued with her tasks. The afternoon passed quickly as she lost herself in the rhythm of housework. She found the physical labor soothing, a welcome distraction from her worries about her father. The sun was starting to lower in the sky when Hayden returned to the house. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the transformed space with obvious appreciation. "You've worked miracles," he said. Catherine smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Not miracles, just elbow grease. It hasn't looked this good since." He trailed off, something flickering across his face too quickly for Catherine to interpret. "Well, in a long time. I should head home soon," Catherine said. "I want to be back before dark." "Of course, let me just get something for you." Hayden disappeared into his study, returning moments later with a small leather pouch. "Your first day's wages." Catherine accepted the pouch, surprised by its weight. "This feels like more than a day's pay." "It's fair compensation for the quality of your work," Hayden insisted. "And there's a little extra for your father's medicine." "Hayden, I can't." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "I'm not offering charity, Catherine. I'm paying you what you've earned with an advance against future work. Your father needs medicine and pride won't help him breathe easier." Put that way, Catherine couldn't argue. "Thank you," she said simply. Hayden walked her out to where Penny was tethered. "Will you be all right riding back alone?" "I'll be fine," Catherine assured him. "The road is clear and Penny knows the way, I'm sure." Hayden helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to acknowledge. "Tomorrow, then?" Hayden asked, stepping back. "Tomorrow," Catherine confirmed. As she rode back toward town, Catherine reflected on the day. Working at Hayden's ranch had been unexpectedly pleasant. The house itself was beautiful, full of character and sturdy craftsmanship that reminded her of her father's work. And Hayden Livingston was not at all what she'd expected based on town gossip. There was a gentleness to him that contradicted his formidable reputation, a thoughtfulness that spoke of depth beyond the taciturn exterior he presented to the world. And Catherine admitted to herself, there was something compelling about him, the quiet strength he exuded, the respect he showed his men and her, the way his rare smile transformed his face. She pushed these thoughts aside as Fort Collins came into view. Right now, her focus needed to be on her father and making sure they survived this difficult time. Romantic notions about her employer would only complicate an already complex situation. Still, as she approached her home with enough money to buy her father's medicine for weeks to come, Catherine couldn't help but feel that her life had taken an unexpected turn for the better when Hayden Livingston stepped forward in the town square and said, "That's enough." The next 2 weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Catherine would rise early, tend to her father, then ride to Hayden's ranch. Her days were filled with housekeeping, cooking, and occasionally helping in the small garden beside the house, which had been somewhat neglected. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the work. The ranch house was becoming more of a home under her care, and there was satisfaction in seeing the transformation. Hayden had given her free rein to organize and improve as she saw fit, and Catherine took pleasure in adding small touches, arranging wildflowers in a forgotten vase, rearranging furniture to make better use of the space. Each evening, she would return home to care for her father, whose condition seemed to be improving slightly with proper medication and care. The extra money from Hayden had allowed her to purchase not only medicine, but also more nutritious food, which was helping Edward regain some strength. On this particular morning in early September, Catherine arrived at the ranch to find Hayden waiting for her on the porch, a serious expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked as she dismounted. "Not wrong exactly," Hayden replied, "but I need to ride into Cheyenne on business. I'll be gone for 3 days. "Oh," Catherine was surprised by the pang of disappointment she felt at the news. "When do you leave?" "This afternoon. I wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable continuing your work while I'm away. The men will be here, of course, and you're welcome to come and go as usual." "Of course," Catherine said. "Everything will be fine." Hayden nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, there's something else." He hesitated, then continued. "I was wondering if you might check on the house in the evenings as well, just to make sure everything's secure. I'd pay you extra for the additional time." "I can do that," Catherine agreed, touched by his trust in her. "After I've seen to my father. Thank you." Hayden's expression softened slightly. "How is he doing?" "Better," Catherine said with a genuine smile. "Dr. Bennett visited yesterday and said his lungs sound clearer. He's even been able to sit on the porch for a bit each day." "I'm glad to hear it." Hayden's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "I should finish preparations for my trip. Miguel knows what needs to be done while I'm gone." As he turned to go, Catherine called after him, "Hayden, be safe." He looked back, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced by a small smile. "I will." The day passed quickly as Catherine busied herself with housework and preparing extra food that the ranch hands could easily reheat during Hayden's absence. Around mid-afternoon, she heard hoofbeats and went to the window to see Hayden riding away, his figure gradually diminishing as he headed north toward Wyoming territory. The house felt strangely empty without his presence, though he was often out working with the cattle or horses during the day anyway. Catherine shook off the feeling and focused on completing her tasks. That evening, after caring for her father and having dinner with him, Catherine rode back to the ranch as promised. The sun was setting as she approached, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The house stood silent against this dramatic backdrop, windows dark. Catherine lit lamps as she moved through the rooms, checking that everything was secure. The familiar space felt different in the evening light, more intimate somehow. She found herself lingering in Hayden's study, running her fingers over the books on his shelves, wondering about the man who read works of philosophy, history, and poetry, alongside practical manuals on ranching and horse breeding. A small framed photograph on his desk caught her attention. It showed a younger Hayden in a Texas Ranger uniform, standing beside a pretty dark-haired woman. Catherine picked it up carefully, studying the image. The woman was smiling up at Hayden, who looked more carefree than Catherine had ever seen him. "His wife," a voice said from the doorway, startling Catherine so badly she nearly dropped the frame. Miguel stood there, holding a lantern. "I'm sorry, Miss Lawson. I saw the lights and wanted to make sure everything was all right." "You frightened me," Catherine said, placing the photograph back exactly where she'd found it. "I didn't hear you come in." "The boss asked me to check in," Miguel explained, "and to make sure you got home safely after dark." Catherine nodded, still thinking about the photograph. "Miguel, you said that was his wife." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "It's not my place to talk about the boss's private life." "Of course, I'm sorry for prying," Catherine said quickly. Miguel sighed. "It's not really a secret, just not something he talks about. Her name was Rebecca. She died 6 years ago, typhoid fever." "How terrible," Catherine whispered, thinking of her own mother's death from the same disease when Catherine was 15. "It changed him," Miguel continued, his voice low. "He was a different man before, more open. After she died, he threw himself into his ranger work, took the most dangerous assignments. Then one day he quit, bought this land, and started over. He's a good man, Miss Lawson, just carrying heavy things." "Thank you for telling me," Catherine said softly. Miguel nodded. "I'll saddle Penny for you. It's getting dark." As they walked out together, Catherine glanced back at the house. Somehow, knowing this piece of Hayden's past made the ranch feel different, not just a place of work, but the refuge of a man who had suffered a devastating loss and was trying to rebuild his life. The next 2 days passed uneventfully. Catherine continued her routine, performing her regular duties during the day and checking the house each evening. Her thoughts often drifted to Hayden, wondering how his business in Cheyenne was progressing and when exactly he would return. On the 3rd evening, Catherine stayed a bit later at the ranch, doing some extra baking to welcome Hayden home. She had just removed a fresh apple pie from the oven when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her heart lifted with anticipation, but when she went to the door, she saw not Hayden but Sheriff Wilson dismounting from his horse. "Sheriff," she greeted him cautiously. "What brings you out here so late?" Wilson removed his hat, his expression grave. "Miss Lawson, I was told I might find you here." A cold feeling settled in Catherine's stomach. "Has something happened to my father?" "No, no," Wilson assured her quickly. "Your father's fine as far as I know. I'm here about Livingston." The cold feeling intensified. "What about him?" "There was an incident in Cheyenne. A telegram came for Miguel, but I thought you should know too, being as you work for him." Wilson hesitated. "Livingston was shot during an altercation at a saloon. He's alive but in bad shape. They've got him at a doctor's place in Cheyenne." Catherine felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Shot? How badly? What happened?" "Don't have many details," Wilson replied. "Just that it was serious and he was asking for Miguel to come." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Listen, Miss Lawson, I know you've been working here, but with Livingston laid up, maybe it's best you go back to whatever you were doing before." "I'm not abandoning my position," Catherine said firmly, surprised by her own vehemence. "When is Miguel leaving for Cheyenne?" "First light tomorrow." "Then I'll speak with him before he goes." After the sheriff left, Catherine sat on the porch, trying to process the news. The thought of Hayden lying wounded in a strange town, possibly fighting for his life, filled her with a deep, visceral dread that surprised her with its intensity. She realized, with a clarity that both frightened and exhilarated her, that her feelings for Hayden Livingston had grown far beyond mere gratitude or employee-employer respect. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Amid the daily interactions and quiet moments, she had begun to care for him deeply. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the ranch before dawn to find Miguel already preparing for the journey. "I'm coming with you," she announced without preamble. Miguel looked up from saddling his horse, surprise written across his face. "To Cheyenne, Miss Lawson, that's not necessary." "It is to me," Catherine replied. "Hayden would do the same for any of us, and I have experience nursing the sick." She didn't add that the sick she had nursed was mainly her father, or that the thought of staying behind, waiting for news, was unbearable. Miguel studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The boss would have my hide if anything happened to you on the journey." "Nothing will happen," Catherine assured him. "We'll be careful, and I can ride as well as any man." "What about your father?" "I've already spoken with Mrs. Peterson. She's agreed to stay at our house until I return." Miguel sighed, recognizing the determination in her eyes. "All right, but we travel fast and it's a rough road." "I can keep up," Catherine promised. The journey to Cheyenne took most of the day, riding hard with few breaks. Catherine was sore and exhausted by the time they reached the Wyoming town, but her concern for Hayden drove her forward. The setting sun cast long shadows as Miguel led the way to a small house on the outskirts of town, with a discreet sign identifying it as Dr. Elliott's residence and surgery. A thin, gray-haired man opened the door to their knock. "You must be Miguel," he said, then looked curiously at Catherine. "Miss Catherine Lawson," Miguel introduced her. "She works for Mr. Livingston." "I have nursing experience," Catherine added quickly. "How is he, doctor?" Elliott's face was grave. "Alive, which is something of a miracle. The bullet missed his heart by an inch, punctured his lung, and lodged near his spine. I was able to remove it, but he's lost a lot of blood and developed a fever." "Can we see him?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded, leading them down a hallway to a small room at the back of the house. "He's been drifting in and out of consciousness. Don't expect much." Nothing could have prepared Catherine for the sight that greeted her. Hayden lay still on the narrow bed, his normally tanned face ashen, a heavy bandage visible on his bare chest above the sheet that covered him. His breathing was labored, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow, evidence of the fever the doctor had mentioned. "Hayden," Catherine whispered, moving to his bedside. She reached out instinctively, placing her cool hand against his burning cheek. To her surprise, his eyelids fluttered at her touch. Slowly, with obvious effort, Hayden opened his eyes. They were glassy with fever, but a flicker of recognition appeared as they focused on her face. "Catherine," his voice was a hoarse whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." "SHH," she soothed, fighting back tears. "Save your strength. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before his eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming him. Dr. Elliott touched Catherine's shoulder gently. "He needs rest, and from the looks of it, so do you. There's a small inn down the street where you can get a room." "I'm staying here," Catherine said firmly, settling into the chair beside Hayden's bed. "At least for tonight." The doctor looked like he might argue, then sighed. "Very well. I'll have my housekeeper bring you some food and coffee. It's going to be a long night." Miguel lingered in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Miss Lawson, go get some rest, Miguel," Catherine told him. "One of us should be clear-headed tomorrow." After Miguel left, Catherine turned her attention back to Hayden. In sleep, the hard lines of his face were softened, making him look younger and more vulnerable. She dipped a cloth into the basin of cool water on the bedside table and gently wiped his fevered brow. "You have to fight, Hayden," she whispered. "You have a ranch to run and people who need you." She hesitated, then added even more softly, "I need you." The night passed in a blur of fever spikes and brief moments of lucidity. Catherine dozed occasionally in the uncomfortable chair but snapped awake at every change in Hayden's breathing or movement. She helped doctor. Elliot changed the bandages once, fighting nausea at the sight of the angry red wound in Hayden's chest. Near dawn, Hayden's fever broke. Catherine was wiping his face with a cool cloth when she realized his skin felt less hot to the touch. A moment later, his eyes opened, clearer than they had been the night before. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice weak but more present. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," Catherine replied with a tired smile. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," she said simply. Hayden's eyes held hers, a question in their depths that neither of them was ready to articulate. Instead, he asked, "What happened?" "You were shot in a saloon," Catherine reminded him gently. "Don't you remember?" Hayden frowned, concentration evident on his face. "Parts. I was meeting a cattle buyer. Then, some men came in. One recognized me from my ranger days, had a grudge. Save your strength," Catherine urged as Hayden's breathing became more labored with the effort of speaking. "You can tell us everything when you're stronger." "The ranch is fine," she assured him. "Thomas and Jeb are handling things, and I've been keeping the house in order." A look of relief crossed Hayden's face. "Thank you," he whispered before drifting back to sleep, this time more peacefully. "Doctor." Elliot came in a short while later to check on his patient. "The fever's broken," he said, sounding pleasantly surprised. "That's an excellent sign. Your presence seems to be good medicine, Miss Lawson. When can he travel?" Catherine asked. "Not for at least a week, possibly 2, the doctor replied. "That lung needs time to heal, and moving him too soon could cause bleeding to start again." Catherine nodded, making a quick mental calculation. "I'll need to send Miguel back to Fort Collins to let them know and to check on my father. I can stay here to nurse Hayden." The next week passed in a blur of long days and longer nights. Catherine divided her time between sitting with Hayden, helping doctor. Elliot change bandages and administer medicines, and catching brief moments of rest in a small room the doctor's housekeeper had prepared for her. Hayden improved steadily, his natural strength and determination speeding his recovery. By the 5th day, he was able to sit up for short periods, and by the 7th, he could take a few tentative steps around the room with Catherine's support. During these days of enforced closeness, Catherine came to know Hayden in ways that might have taken months or years under normal circumstances. In his weakened state, some of his usual reserve fell away, and he spoke more freely of his childhood in Kentucky, his time as a ranger, and eventually his marriage to Rebecca. "She was a schoolteacher," he told Catherine one evening as they sat together, Hayden propped up in bed, Catherine in her usual chair. "Smart as a whip and twice as kind. We were married for 4 years before the fever took her." "I'm so sorry," Catherine said softly. "I lost my mother to typhoid when I was 15. It leaves such a hole in your life." Hayden nodded, understanding in his eyes. "For a long time I thought that hole would swallow me whole. I took risks I shouldn't have, almost hoping." He trailed off. "That one would be your last," Catherine finished for him, recognizing the impulse from her own darkest moments after her mother's death. "Yes," Hayden admitted. "But then one day I was tracking a gang that had been terrorizing small towns along the border. They'd killed a young mother in front of her children." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I cornered the leader in a canyon and we exchanged gunfire. I took a bullet in the arm, but I got him. And as I was lying there, bleeding, waiting for the rest of the Rangers to find me, I had the strangest thought." "What was that?" Catherine asked. "That Rebecca would be furious with me for being so careless with the life she loved." A small smile touched his lips. "I could almost hear her scolding me, and I realized that dying wouldn't honor her memory. Living would. So you left the Rangers and came to Colorado. Hayden nodded. Needed a fresh start. Somewhere I could build something lasting instead of just enforcing the law after bad things happened. Your ranch is beautiful, Catherine said. You've created something special there. It's getting there, Hayden agreed, though it looked a lot better after you started working on the house. He hesitated, then asked, "Why did you come to Cheyenne, Catherine? Miguel could have handled things." Catherine looked down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious. "I was worried about you. I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt and alone in a strange town." "I've been alone for a long time," Hayden said quietly. Catherine raised her eyes to meet his. "You're not alone anymore." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the day he stepped forward in the town square and said, "That's enough." But before either could speak further, Dr. Elliot entered to check on his patient, and the moment passed. 2 days later, Dr. Elliot declared Hayden fit enough to travel, provided they took it slowly and stopped frequently for rest. "No riding," he instructed sternly. "You'll travel by wagon and Miss Lawson will drive. Any sign of fever or fresh bleeding, and you stop immediately and find the nearest doctor." "Yes, sir," Hayden said with mock solemnity that didn't quite hide his eagerness to return home. The journey back to Fort Collins took 2 days, with an overnight stay at a small way station halfway between Cheyenne and their destination. Despite the discomfort of travel, Hayden seemed to grow stronger with each mile that brought him closer to his ranch. When they finally crested the rise that revealed the ranch buildings in the distance, Hayden let out a sigh of contentment. "Never thought a pile of logs could look so good," he murmured. Catherine smiled, understanding the feeling perfectly. "Home always looks best when you've been away." "Home," Hayden repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose it is that now. Took a while to feel that way." As they approached the house, Thomas, Jeb, and Miguel, who had ridden ahead to prepare for their arrival, came out to meet them. The men's joy at seeing their boss returning upright and alert was evident in their faces. "Place still standing, I see," Hayden called to them as Catherine brought the wagon to a stop. "No thanks to us," Jeb replied with a grin. "Miss Lawson left enough instructions to keep an army organized." With Miguel and Thomas's help, Hayden made his way into the house. Catherine followed, carrying the small bag of her belongings she'd brought to Cheyenne. As she entered the familiar main room, she was struck by a sudden realization. Her time at the ranch was essentially complete. The month of service Mayor Thompson had decreed was finished, and Hayden was home, albeit still recovering. The thought of returning to her previous life, the constant worry about money, the isolation as she cared for her father filled her with a sense of loss that went beyond concern about financial security. In the past month, she had found not just employment but purpose at the Livingston Ranch. And more than that, she had found a connection with Hayden that defied simple categorization. Later that evening, after ensuring Hayden was comfortably settled in his bedroom with everything he needed close at hand, Catherine prepared to leave for her own home. "I should get back to my father," she said, standing somewhat awkwardly in the doorway of Hayden's room. "I've been away longer than I planned." Hayden, propped up against his pillows, nodded. "Of course, you must be worried about him. Mrs. Peterson has been taking good care of him, but yes." Catherine hesitated. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on you and to cook some meals that will be easy for you to reheat." "You don't have to do that," Hayden said quickly. "You've already done more than enough. The month of service is over, Catherine. You're free of your obligation." Something in his tone made Catherine look at him more closely. His face was carefully neutral, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to be free of my obligation to you?" Hayden looked away. "What I want isn't relevant." You have your own life, your father to care for. Catherine took a step into the room. What if I don't want to be free of my connection to this place? To you? His eyes snapped back to hers, a flicker of something hope, perhaps visible in their depths before he masked it. Catherine, I can't ask you to, you're not asking, she interrupted. I'm offering. I want to keep working here, Hayden, not because of some decree from the mayor, but because I choose to. And what about when your father is well enough to travel? You mentioned his dream of going to San Francisco, where the climate might be better for his health. Catherine was surprised he remembered that detail from a conversation they'd had weeks ago. That's still his dream, yes, but it's not mine, not anymore. Hayden's expression softened. What is your dream, Catherine? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that went far beyond the simple words. Catherine took another step forward, then another, until she stood beside his bed. My dream, she said softly, is to build something lasting. To create a home filled with warmth and life. To be somewhere I'm needed and valued. She took a deep breath. To be with someone who sees me for who I truly am. Hayden reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, his calloused fingers gentle as they entwined with hers. I see you, Catherine Lawson, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've seen you since that day in the town square when you stood tall despite your fear. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've known since Rebecca, and he broke off, struggling for words. And you? Catherine prompted, her heart beating wildly in her chest. And I've fallen in love with you, Hayden said simply. I didn't plan to, didn't think I could love again after Rebecca. But here you are, and here I am, and somehow everything's different. Joy flooded through Catherine, bright and overwhelming. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since you saved me from that whipping, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. Hayden smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both too stubborn for our own good. Perhaps, Catherine agreed with a small laugh. But stubborn people build things that last. Is that what we're doing, building something that will last? Catherine nodded, squeezing his hand. If you want to. I want to, Hayden affirmed. But there's your father to consider. I won't ask you to choose between us. You don't have to, Catherine said. I spoke with Dr. Bennett before we left for Cheyenne. He believes Papa is strong enough now to make the journey to California, especially if we travel by train most of the way and take it slowly. We? Hayden questioned, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Yes, we, Catherine confirmed. I thought, perhaps you might come with us. Help us get settled in San Francisco, then return here to prepare the ranch for winter. And then in the spring. She trailed off, suddenly shy. In the spring, Hayden prompted. In the spring, if Papa is doing well with his new doctors and if you still want me, I could come back. Permanently. Hayden's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and longing. I'll always want you, Catherine, but are you sure? This life isn't easy and I'm not always an easy man. I'm sure, she said firmly. I've seen the worst and best of you, Hayden Livingston. The man who nearly died in Cheyenne. The man who runs this ranch with fairness and integrity. The man who stepped forward when everyone else stood by and said that's enough. That's the man I love, complexities and all. Hayden tugged gently on her hand, drawing her down until she was seated on the edge of the bed. His free hand came up to cup her cheek. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Love isn't about deserving, Catherine replied. It's about choosing. And I choose you, Hayden. Every day I choose you. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Hayden leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise, the promise of a future together, of a love that had sprung from an unexpected moment of courage in a town square. When they finally parted, Catherine rested her forehead against his, content to share the same breath, the same space. "I should still go check on my father tonight," she said reluctantly. "Of course," Hayden agreed, "but you'll come back tomorrow." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Catherine promised with a smile. The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Edward Lawson, upon learning of his daughter's feelings for Hayden and their plans, gave his blessing with tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become," he told Catherine. "All I've ever wanted is your happiness, and I can see that Livingston makes you happy." The journey to San Francisco was arduous despite taking the train for most of the distance, but Edward's health held steady. The mild coastal climate agreed with him immediately, and the specialist they consulted offered treatments that weren't available in Colorado. Finding suitable lodgings and getting Edward settled took nearly a month, during which time Hayden stayed at a nearby hotel, visiting daily but giving Catherine and her father space to adjust to their new surroundings. His patience and understanding only deepened Catherine's love for him. Before Hayden returned to Colorado to prepare the ranch for winter and spring, he asked Catherine to marry him properly, presenting her with a simple gold ring with a small sapphire that had been his mother's. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not because of obligation or circumstances, but because I want to spend my life with you, Catherine Lawson." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in a small ceremony at the boarding house where Edward was staying, with only her father, the landlady, and a local minister as witnesses. The simplicity of the occasion suited them both, neither wanting nor needing grand gestures to affirm their commitment. "I'll be back for you in the spring," Hayden promised as they said their goodbyes at the train station. "By then, your father should be well established with his new doctors." "I'll be counting the days," Catherine replied, memorizing the details of his face as if she might forget them in the months ahead. Winter in San Francisco was mild compared to Colorado, but Catherine found herself missing the ranch, the vast open spaces, the rhythm of ranch life, and most of all, Hayden's steady presence. His letters arrived regularly, full of news about the ranch, the town, and his plans for their future together. In his absence, Catherine threw herself into caring for her father, whose health improved dramatically under the care of his new doctors. By February, Edward was well enough to take short walks along the waterfront and had even begun drawing up plans for small woodworking projects, his love of craftsmanship returning as his strength did. "You should go back to him," Edward said one evening as they sat by the fire in their small but comfortable lodgings. "I can see how you miss him." "We agreed on spring," Catherine replied, "and I won't leave you until I'm certain you're fully recovered." Edward smiled. The lines of pain that had marked his face for so long now softened. "Katie, I haven't felt this well in years. Dr. Williams says my lungs are clearing nicely, and Mrs. Bennett next door has offered to look in on me daily if you were to leave." "But Papa, no buts," Edward interrupted gently. "You've put your life on hold for me long enough. That man loves you and you love him. Don't waste any more time apart than necessary. Life is too short, as your mother's passing taught us both." After much discussion, Catherine finally agreed. She wrote to Hayden immediately, telling him of her change in plans and when to expect her. His reply came by telegram, just 3 words: "Counting the days." The journey back to Colorado in early March was long but filled with anticipation. As the train pulled into Denver, Catherine felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Would everything be the same? Had Hayden's feelings changed in the months they'd been apart? Her worries dissipated the moment she stepped onto the platform and saw him waiting, hat in hand, his face alight with joy at the sight of her. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, sweeping her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. "You're really here," he murmured against her hair. "I was afraid I'd dreamed you." "I'm here," Catherine confirmed, laughing through happy tears, "and I'm not going anywhere." The ride from Denver to Fort Collins was filled with conversation as they caught each other up on the details that hadn't fit into letters. Hayden had expanded the ranch house, adding a proper bedroom for Catherine with large windows that faced the mountains. "Though I'm hoping you won't be using it for long," he added with a smile that made her blush. "I thought we could have a proper church wedding in Fort Collins if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Catherine agreed. When they crested the rise that revealed the ranch, Catherine gasped in surprise. The transformation was remarkable. New fencing surrounded the expanded corrals, the barn had been reinforced and expanded, and the house itself had a fresh coat of paint. Most surprising of all was the new garden, at least 3 times the size of the old one, surrounded by a white picket fence. "You've been busy," she said, amazed. Hayden looked pleased by her reaction. "Wanted everything to be perfect for you. Miguel's wife, Elena, has been helping with the garden. She said every ranch needs a good kitchen garden. Miguel's married in January. She's the daughter of a rancher near Denver. Good woman, strong, you'll like her." As they pulled up to the house, Catherine was surprised to see people gathered on the porch, not just Miguel, Thomas, and Jeb, but several women as well. One stepped forward as Hayden helped Catherine down from the wagon. "Welcome home, Mrs. Livingston," the woman said warmly. "I'm Elena Vasquez. The men have been talking about nothing but your return for weeks." "It's wonderful to meet you," Catherine replied, touched by the welcome. "But I'm not Mrs. Livingston yet." Elena laughed. "According to my husband, it's just a formality. You've been the heart of this ranch since you first started working here." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations for the wedding and settling back into ranch life. Catherine found that the rhythms of the place came back to her naturally. The early mornings, the satisfaction of creating order and comfort in the house, the quiet evenings with Hayden by the fire. What was different now was the openness between them. Where once Hayden had been reserved, now he freely expressed his thoughts and feelings. Where once Catherine had held back out of propriety and uncertainty, now she embraced the depth of her feelings for him. They were married on a perfect spring day in early April 1879, with the mountains as a backdrop and the entire town of Fort Collins in attendance. Mayor Thompson, somewhat humbled by the events of the past year and the clear happiness of the couple, offered a surprisingly heartfelt toast at the reception held on the grounds of the ranch. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "And to the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Hayden's arm tightened around Catherine's waist as he responded, "I'll drink to that." Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their home, truly their home now, looking at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky, Catherine felt a sense of completion she'd never known before. "Happy?" Hayden asked softly, his arms encircling her from behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "A year ago, I was standing on a platform in the town square, certain my life was about to change for the worse. Instead, it changed for the better the moment you stepped forward and said that's enough." Hayden turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I thank God every day that I was there at that moment, that somehow, out of all the paths my life could have taken, it led me to you." "As mine led me to you," Catherine agreed. "Not the easiest path, perhaps, but the right one." "The only one," Hayden corrected, lowering his head to capture her lips in a kiss that spoke of love, commitment, and the promise of a future built together, day by day. on the foundation they had already begun to lay. Over the next 2 years, the Livingston Ranch flourished. Hayden's innovative breeding program produced cattle that were hardy enough for the Colorado winters, but produced exceptional beef, earning him contracts with buyers as far away as Chicago. Catherine's management of the household and gardens ensured that the ranch became known for its hospitality as well as its livestock. Edward Lawson's health continued to improve in San Francisco, to the point where he began taking on small woodworking commissions. His letters to Catherine were full of enthusiasm for his new life and the friends he was making in the woodworkers' community. In the spring of 1881, Catherine gave birth to a son they named James Edward Livingston, after Hayden's father and Catherine's. The boy had his father's strong features but his mother's gentle eyes, a combination that made both parents predict he would be a force to be reckoned with when he grew up. "He's perfect," Hayden whispered the first time he held his son, awe and terror mingling in his expression. "He is," Catherine agreed, exhausted but radiant. "And so are you, Hayden Livingston." "Hardly," Hayden scoffed, but his eyes were soft as they moved from his son to his wife. "But I promise you both I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Catherine assured him. "You always have been, from the moment you stepped forward when no one else would." As little James grew from an infant to a toddler, Edward Lawson finally agreed to return to Colorado for an extended visit. His reunion with his daughter and first meeting with his grandson was a joyous occasion, made all the more special by the obvious bond that formed instantly between Edward and James. "He has the Lawson hands," Edward observed proudly as James grasped his grandfather's finger. "He'll be good with wood. And horses," Hayden added. "Don't forget he's a Livingston, too." The two men shared a look of understanding and mutual respect that warmed Catherine's heart. The family she had feared losing had instead expanded, enriching her life beyond measure. In the summer of 1883, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, Rebecca Louise and Hannah Marie, named for Hayden's first wife and Catherine's mother. The double blessing brought new joy and challenges to the ranch, but Hayden proved to be as adept at fatherhood as he was at ranching, often carrying one baby while Catherine carried the other as they went about their daily routines. "I never imagined this life," he confessed to Catherine one evening as they sat on the porch, watching 3-year-old James chase fireflies while the twins slept inside. "After Rebecca died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd live out my days alone on this ranch, just me and the cattle and the memories." "And now," Catherine asked, though she knew the answer from the contentment evident in every line of his face. "Now I can't imagine any other life than this one, with you and our children." Hayden's hand found hers in the gathering dusk. "You saved me, Catherine, not just in Cheyenne when I was shot, but every day since you came into my life." "We saved each other," Catherine corrected gently, "and we'll keep doing so one day at a time." The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect Colorado summer day. As Catherine stood in the doorway of their home, watching Hayden teach James how to brush one of the gentler horses while the twins babbled in the playpen Hayden had built on the porch, she was struck by how far they had come from that fateful day in the town square. The young woman who had stood trembling on that platform, facing public humiliation and pain, could never have imagined the life that awaited her. A life built on courage, compassion, and the love of a man who had been brave enough to say, "That's enough," when it mattered most. As if feeling her gaze, Hayden looked up and smiled a smile that still, after all this time, made Catherine's heart beat a little faster. In that smile was everything they had built together and everything that was yet to come. And in that moment, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that their story, which had begun with an act of courage in the face of injustice, would continue to unfold in ways that would honor that beginning. That the love they had found in the wild and beautiful landscape of Colorado would endure, as steadfast as the mountains that watched over them and as boundless as the skies above.